Welcome to the new Change in the Map series, a series dedicated to geopolitical changes on the world map, whether borders or capitals or, whatever. For this episode, we've got an update for Central Asia involving the border between the nations of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Both nations were originally Soviet republics within the Soviet Union up until its dissolution in 1991, where they both achieved independence. During Soviet times, the border between them was set in 1929, but was overall much more generalized, and both had disagreements about where the border should be. But with them both being under Moscow's control, the issues were less of a problem. But once they achieved independence in 1991, now these nations had to have a more defined boundary between them, and that's when the problems began. Smaller military clashes or incursions began happening between the two countries along their borders starting in the early 2000s, but were mostly small in scale. However, in spring of 2021, a 3-day battle broke out between the two nations that not only had a small amount of bloodshed, but temporarily displaced tens of thousands of their citizens. Another even larger clash occurred in September of 2022 that displaced well over 100,000 people. Eventually, though, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan resolved to finally settle this dispute and demark their border. Of their roughly 1,000-kilometer border between them, only around 420 of the kilometers had been fully demarked, so they basically had to negotiate with each other over half their border. By December of 2024, the two nations had worked out an agreement, and it was approved by the country's leaders on February 21st, 2025, then confirmed again on March 12th. As of the time of me making this video, Kyrgyzstan's parliament has ratified the agreement, while Tajikistan's parliament is waiting on the upper chamber of its parliament to ratify it, but everyone agrees it's going to happen. So what about the border has changed? Well, since a lot of it was basically clearing up a vague border, many changes were quite small and almost negligible on a more zoomed out map. But even for larger changes to the border, I actually couldn't find any map that summarized the whole thing. So I decided to try my own, based off of the descriptions in news articles, as well as notable differences in various current satellite maps compared to older ones. The main area of contention was around the landlocked Tajik territory of Voruk and the bit of territory that narrowly reaches down to almost touch it but not quite. Most of the changes in the border resulted from making sure pastoral lands were able to be used by the locals of nearby towns without having to cross the border. The Voruk area was expanded in exchange for minor concessions in the Batken area. Notably, one town given to Tajikistan was named Dostuk, which translates to friendship. However, there is more than one Dostuk in the area, and this has caused some discrepancies between sources. Most of the sources, especially the more local ones, said it was the Dostuk near Batken, but Google Maps weirdly shows a Dostuk further west as within Kyrgyz borders yet labeled as Tajikstani. Considering this seemed to be the only one showing this, I assumed Google just made a mistake here. It's also possible that there may have been other small border changes not mentioned by the multiple news articles that I was able to find, but this map at least shows you the general idea. Another notable aspect is that a village named Tortkocho is to be made a neutral village owned by neither side. Tortkocho is at an intersection of two highways that cross a narrow point of the border that are used by both countries extensively. In fact, the agreement also called for several border area highways to be opened up to both parties as a demilitarized zone as well. Both nations also promised to resettle people to new homes if needed after these changes are made. So let's hope that this peace deal ends the fighting. In other news, Mauritius had an election, and their new Prime Minister, Navin Ramgoolam, has rejected the proposed agreement of the British handover of the Chagos Islands, so that matter is now back to the negotiating table. Looks like the sun won't technically set on the British Empire for just a little longer. Bougainville, meanwhile, after having meetings with the Papua New Guinea government this week, has affirmed its dedication to wanting its promised independence by late 2027, but the Papua New Guinea government is taking its sweet time. It's moving pretty slowly. And that'll do it for this episode of New Change in the Map. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.